Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Flavor Bursts for School Food. My name is Cathy Powers, and I'm today's moderator. Joining me are three of the country's top school chefs, Garret Berdan, Samantha Gasbarro, and Rebecca Polson. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Washington Red Raspberry Commission. Today, we are introducing their new K-12 Toolkit that we helped develop and features today's three school chefs. It's full of tips, techniques, and recipes using flavorful Washington red raspberry, which make up 90% of the nation's frozen red raspberry crop. A bonus, Washington red raspberry seedless puree is now a USDA bonus buy. I call this magic sauce because it tastes amazing. A few housekeeping items. The K-12 Toolkit is available under the Handout tab in the Attendee Control Panel. You will need to download it during the webinar. We will also email you the link to the Handout tab after the webinar. The CEU certificates from the School Nutrition Association and from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics are also downloadable under the Handout tab. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted until the question and answer time. However, if you have any technical issues, please access the help screen at the top of your attendee control panel. If you have any questions during the demonstrations, please type them into the question box in your control panel, and they will be addressed. At the end of the presentation and demonstrations, we'll have time for question and answer. At that time, you can raise your hand, and we will unmute you so that you can ask questions. An overview of the webinar. We will begin with an introduction and talk about what flavor bursts are. Then each chef will do a recipe demonstration and talk about flavor points. We'll then wrap up with a moderated panel discussion and time for questions and answers. Plus, we have a giveaway today. We will be sending 3 lucky winners a box of frozen red raspberry products, which include IQF whole raspberries, IQF whole and broken crumbles, the magic sauce, the pasteurized red raspberry puree, and then micro-dried raspberry fragments and micro-dried raspberry powder. You must be present to win, so stay through the webinar to be eligible for today's giveaway. The objectives for today's webinar include being able to develop the culinary skills necessary for school meal preparation, demonstrate healthier cooking methods that apply the principles of the dietary guidelines for Americans, and use techniques and ingredients to increase the flavor and appeal of school meals. Before we get started, let's have a poll question. We would like to know, what is your favorite fresh herb? So we are launching the poll, and we will have less than a minute. It'll be up, so please take the opportunity to identify your favorite fresh herb: basil, cilantro, parsley, or mint. So we're wrapping up the poll, and there's 2 clear winners. It's tied. 41% said basil, 41% said cilantro, 14% said parsley, and only 5% said mint. How interesting. Well, that's just to get us started. Let's now talk about flavor bursts. And I came up with the title Flavor Burst after I tried the frozen red raspberry puree, because that's what it did for me. It just burst of flavor. And I thought, what a great focus for a webinar for school meals, talking about how you can really add that burst of flavor to school meals. First, let's define flavor. Most of us, when we think about flavor, it's really taste that we're thinking of. And actually, flavor involves all of the senses. It involves taste, but it also involves smell, touch, sight, and sound. With taste, there are only 5 basic tastes. We have sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. Just 5 basic tastes. Sweet is the taste, the preference that we're born with. We have a preference for sweet from birth. Salty is our next taste that we develop a preference for, and that usually comes at 4 to 6 months. The sour, that taste that provides the bright, sharp flavors from the acidic ingredients, develops later. And then bitterness is a taste that sometimes doesn't develop until early adulthood. The 5th taste is umami, and this means Japanese for delicious or deliciousness. And this is the taste that's described as savory, brothy, or meaty. And it comes from meats, cheeses, tomatoes, mushrooms, and fermented products. Unlike tastes, which there are only 5 basic tastes, smell, there are thousands and thousands of distinct smells. Researchers estimate that smells make up 80 to 90% of every food's flavor. So smell is even more critical than just taste. Think about when you used to walk into a mall and you would be greeted with that cinnamon smell. You might not have even been hungry for a cinnamon roll, but that smell stimulates the appetite. The same is true in our dining rooms, our cafeteria. What are the students smelling when they come in? Is it an old mop bucket, or is it the delicious smell of lunch cooking? Mouthfeel is equally important. What's the temperature of the food? What's the texture? The coolness of the mint, the burn of the chilies, the mouthfeel plays an important role. Sight, we've talked a long time about how we eat with our eyes first. Are there different shapes? Are there different colors? Is there consistency in cut size? Does the food look moist and inviting? And then sound is important. Do we have that crunch, that crackle, the sizzle, the bubble of carbonation? I think with sound, something that comes to mind as an example, and this relates to the touch as well. That's with croutons on a salad. Have you ever gotten a salad where the croutons were kept in the refrigerator and you're expecting to bite in and get that crunch and that texture, and instead you bite in and they're soft and sometimes mushy? How disappointing. So it takes all of the senses, what's happening with our taste, but the smell, the sight, the texture, and the sound. And flavor is important. In fact, it's the most important factor influencing food choices today. We also know that flavor and healthful cooking are bound together. You don't have the crutches of a lot of heavy cream and butter and salt. As we cook more healthfully, we need to pay more attention to the flavor. And we also know that the American palate has grown bolder. Our students' palates are bolder than they've ever been. I think back to when I enjoyed school meals, and I didn't really like a lot of sour, and certainly didn't like things spicy. But today's students love the spice and love the sour, and we need to cater to their taste. So let's go back to our flavor bursts and flavor boosts. What do we mean by that? What I'm thinking is with herbs, the real pungency of fresh cilantro, or that coolness of mint, or the vibrancy of fresh basil. With spices, thinking about the warm cinnamon, or the smoked paprika, or my favorite, the Aleppo pepper. It has just a nice heat in the finish. Peppers, whether it's hot pepper sauce, sweet bell peppers, or jalapenos, add a lot of flavor boost. Fruits, I think of lemons, raspberries, kumquats, add a lot of flavor. Condiments, horseradish to a tomato ketchup changes it completely. Mustard with the mayonnaise creates a whole new spread. And then acidic ingredients, vinegars, citrus and citrus juices and zest, and tomatoes and tomato products do a lot to bring out the flavor in foods. So now let's bring up our first chef. It's really my pleasure to introduce Chef Garret Berdan. Chef Garret Berdan works for the Spokane Public Schools in the state of Washington, where he is the menu planner. Previously, he was child nutrition specialist with the Oregon Department of Education. He has a culinary arts certificate from the Culinary Institute of America, and he was named a White House Champion of Change for his work with Chefs Move to School in 2011. Welcome, Garret. We're delighted to have you join us today.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That's a kind introduction. I loved how you talked about the aroma of cinnamon rolls as we used to walk into a mall. And that is one of my absolute favorite aromas. And like you said, Kathy, the aromas that we have going on in our school kitchens can really be inviting to our customers as they come into the kitchen and they enter the building. So this scone recipe is whole grain rich, and it uses IQF raspberries, Washington red raspberries. It's just so easy. So what I have here, I already have my dry ingredients weighed out and measured out in my mixing bowl. And so what I'm going to do is just mix together the dry ingredients, because there's some leavening agents in there. I have whole wheat flour, all-purpose flour, sugar, baking powder, and baking soda. And the recipe is in that resource that Kathy referred to. And now I'm going to grab my raspberries out of the freezer. Now these are IQF raspberries, as I mentioned. And for a baking item like this, where the berries are going to be mixed in, I want to keep the raspberries frozen for as long as possible. If they start to thaw at all, then they'll start to release their juices, which isn't a bad thing, because we do like juicy berries, but the juices will also color the dough of the scone. So to the dry ingredients, I added the IQF berries, and now I'm going to dust them with the dry ingredients. Doing this helps to kind of lock in the moisture a little bit and the color. It just coats the berry, but it also will help keep them suspended in the dough. Okay, so now that that's done, this recipe does use some butter. Now I have butter that's been melted and has been sitting at room temperature, and I learned this trick from, I believe it was America's Test Kitchen. I'm going to add my cold buttermilk to the butter, the melted butter, and so this is sort of going to create a marbled, buttery buttermilk mixture. where we have small chunks and pieces of butter mixed in with the wet ingredients. And this is sort of like cutting the butter into a dough. So it'll give us a little bit of flakiness to the scone. So then I'll add this to my dry ingredients. And then I'll gently mix. Now, in the instructions, I suggested to gently mix, and you don't want to overmix a scone dough. So we're going to kind of fold the wet ingredients into the dry until basically we start to kind of see the raspberries reveal themselves. And the majority of the dry ingredients are incorporated. If we go further, we'll end up with a tough scone and a very colored dough. So I think we're almost there. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. So now I have my my pan already prepared with parchment, and I've sprayed it with a little bit of pan release spray. And so now I'm just going to take my number 12 scoop, which is a third of a cup, and I will scoop these on. You want to leave about 2 inches space between each of the scones. And these are what I think one might call a drop scone, not a cut scone. They do rise and spread a little bit. And if they touch, it's not the end of the world. So I should be able to fit all 9. The recipe that I'm using is smaller, but this is going to yield 9 scones for me. You know, the reason I love scones so much is they are quick and easy, and it's such a comforting food item, you know, and especially in such a strange school year that we're having, our students need those comforts more now than ever. And, you know, in our school district, we're doing meal kits, a 5-day meal kits that are picked up weekly. And as much as we can, we're trying to, you know, add some comfort to the meal kit. Now, these scones could be a great way to, you know, add a little fresh baked item to the meal kit, even if you are not eating in school at this time. So these are ready to go into a 425 degree oven for about 14 minutes. So I'll pop these in the oven and set my timer. Okay, and what results I'll show you now are these beautiful browned scones. And, you know, I love this because you've got the berry in there that adds a little flavor burst to the scone, a pop of color. And let me take this one here. We've got a really beautiful raspberry right there. And I'm going to put this into my breakfast basket where I have a yogurt, a scone for my 1 grain equivalent, and an applesauce. So I'll show this to you all as a close-up. There we go. And that makes a really nice breakfast, whether you're eating lunch or serving meals in school or via pickup.
Garrett, I love that recipe. And one of the things I love is that it is so easy. You know, when we think about baking in your school, most people think that it's really challenging. You might not have the equipment. It's too difficult. But that recipe is such a super easy recipe, almost foolproof.
Thanks, Cathy. You know, it is super easy. And speaking of flavor bursts, you know, not only do these raspberries add just some great flavor to the scones, I wanted to mention, you know, I like to use citrus as a way to add some flavor. And the cool thing about citrus, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers know this, but the zest of citrus adds a lot of amazing natural flavor for that, for like a lemon or a lime. And then the juice punches up the acid if you have a need for that, like in a salad or something.
You know, I think of the zest kind of as free flavor because you have it to begin with. And it utilizes the whole product. That's one of my favorite flavor bursts as well.
Great.
Well, thank you, Garrett. What we're going to do now is we're going to rate this recipe. So we're going to pull up the poll and rate this recipe for using in your school? Are you unlikely to use this recipe? Might give it a try? Good chance that it'll work for your school, or it'll definitely be a hit. So let's rate this recipe. Might give it a try, good chance it'll work, definitely be a hit, unlikely to use it. So we are about to close the poll. The poll is closing. Great, Garrett. 29%.
Oh, those are good results.
Most a third said might give it a try. 43% said good chance that it'll work. And then 29% said definitely be a hit. That's a great recipe. Thank you, Garrett. And I love how easy it is. We'll be back to you in a few. We'll be back to you in a few minutes, Garrett. Now I'd like to introduce our next school chef, Chef Samantha Gasbarro. Chef Sam is the executive chef of HealthySchoolRecipes.com. Previously, she was chef and nutrition coordinator for the Wyndham Raymond schools in Maine, on the complete opposite side of the country from Garrett. She has a bachelor's degree in culinary nutrition from Johnson & Wales University and is on the advisory board of the Culinary Institute of Child Nutrition at the Institute of Child Nutrition. Hi, Chef Sam. How are you today?
Hello, doing great. Excited to be here.
Oh, Sam, I'm so excited to have you join us. And I was enamored with your recipe. It was so much fun. In fact, we even tried it for dinner at our house. It's a great recipe. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, great. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm excited today to make for you raspberry bacon nachos using the delicious flavor of frozen raspberries and their puree, which is so flavorful and delicious. This is a sweet and savory combination that is sure to really appeal to a variety of students. And one of my favorite parts about this recipe is that it utilizes ingredients that you probably already have in your school nutrition kitchen right now. So a simple, wonderful recipe, and really just giving a twist to the standard breakfast option. So the first ingredient that we're gonna, for the recipe, is a pre-baked frozen waffles. So most of you are familiar with these, and depending on the brand you have, you just bake according to the package directions. And you want to make sure that these are nice and crispy because they're going to have sauce on it as a nacho. So you want to make sure that's going to absorb the sauce and hold it without getting too soggy. So really having a nice crispy waffle is necessary for this recipe. Then I pre-baked some bacon pieces, and this is something that's really easy to do. Obviously, you've probably done it in your kitchen. You might have bacon or turkey bacon in your freezer. Either one you could use. But this is that savory piece to the nachos that is going to complement that sweet and savory that kids really like. So you want to keep these things warm, these ingredients warm until you're ready to assemble your nachos. Another key point to preparing breakfast is, I know we are on such limited time when we're preparing breakfast that if you create a menu where you're having similar ingredients in a variety of menu items, if for the bacon for one day you're making the raspberry bacon nachos, and then you're also making a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich, having one person make all the bacon and then you split it up across the recipes that you're using really is a way to create kitchen efficiency, to work smarter and not harder in your kitchen. The same thing goes for waffles. You know, you can use some for the nachos and use others for just a waffle and maple syrup and fruit meal to go to children. So really making items in bulk creates kitchen efficiencies and reduces the workload in the kitchen while creating flavorful, delicious menu items in a variety of them. So now that we have our waffles all set and our bacon, now I'm going to create a dipping sauce or a sauce for the nachos. And this is one of my it's such a delicious sauce. It's one of my favorites, and it's using the raspberry puree. So right here, I have the frozen raspberry puree, which is so delicious, as Cathy mentioned, and full of flavor. I love it in a variety of dishes as well. And here I have a just vanilla yogurt, a plain vanilla yogurt. And I'm going to create my own raspberry yogurt and with the vanilla yogurt, which is important because it allows me to control the flavoring and also potentially the crediting as this puree does credit. So that way also it lessens the bulk of buying boxes of raspberry yogurt to use in this recipe, and you just have your base ingredient of vanilla yogurt that you might use in a variety of parfaits or other dishes across your menu, and you're just taking this delicious raspberry puree out of your freezer in the quantities that you need, and you're creating your own raspberry yogurt dip for these nachos, which is great because that way you're not going to overbuy or underbuy raspberry yogurt and not use it, and you can really make more with the vanilla or not, and you're utilizing freezer space with a small container of raspberry puree versus taking up a lot of fridge space with bulk packages of raspberry yogurt. So now, and controlling the flavor of this is really important. So now I'm going to add this puree right to my yogurt. So delicious. And I also love the color that this adds to the yogurt. Every time I use this ingredient, it's so delicious, but it also just makes me want to create a Valentine's Day menu. That pink is such a beautiful color, and it's so rich and nice. Even if you did parfaits where you layered the red with the white with this raspberry puree, it's just such a great option. It's so colorful and so appealing, as we mentioned, that kids eat with their eyes. So now we have very simple, very easy. I just added that right to the yogurt. Keeping it simple for breakfast is the key while offering a variety of items. So now, in creating great flavor profiles. So now I'm just gonna assemble this dish. So I have my waffles. This right here, I've pre-packaged as a grab and go. So if you're gonna pre-package this item and have it ready to go as meal delivery or meal pickup, it's important to keep all the ingredients separate. So what we have here, as I put my gloves on, is we're gonna combine all these flavors. And especially if kids are picking it up to go back to the classroom, it's a good idea to keep ingredients separate, but you don't have to for this if they're gonna pick it up and eat it right away. So here I've taken my waffles and I've cut them into pieces to resemble chips. So I've just cut them into quarters. And then you can place them in the boat, just like this, for a 1 ounce, 2 ounce grain equivalent, and you have this beautiful boat. And then I'm gonna take my yogurt, portion out some yogurt into here. And then you can put a little on top as well. So you have this beautiful presentation. I'm gonna add a little bit of yogurt, add some bacon. That's that sweet and savory combination. And then here I'm gonna take these raspberry pieces that are so delicious, and they stay frozen till the last minute. And I really like this product because it really diffuses the raspberry flavor, that delicious, sweet, tart flavor of a raspberry. Instead of having a huge, I got one little chunk here, but instead of having like one big chunk of raspberry, I love these bits because it really does diffuse that flavor. So you have these beautiful nachos, and then you add the yogurt dip. And then you could take a little remaining vanilla yogurt just to create that nice color contrast to get that visual appeal. And you can add it right to the top. So you have this beautiful, I hope you guys can get a good image of this, beautiful visual appeal of these raspberry bacon waffle nachos, a great breakfast item and really delicious. Or you can keep everything separate as I've done here. Make sure that if you're keeping it all separate for this grab and go closed container, you are lidding, putting lids on all these small souffle cups. So that way the moisture from the raspberries and the yogurt and the bacon don't get onto the waffles. And you can keep the bacon separate as you might want to keep that warm or serve these things cold on the side. But really two great options of serving this delicious raspberry bacon nachos.
Thanks, Chef Sam. That looks delicious. And you are absolutely correct that not all raspberry flavors are created equal. These Washington red raspberries that are frozen right at the peak of their harvest have such an intense flavor. And making your own raspberry yogurt is heads and shoulders above buying a prepackaged flavored yogurt. In fact, when we were developing the toolkit, we developed some raspberry smoothies, and that flavor just made such a difference, whether we were pairing it with pineapple or banana or other fruits. That raspberry flavor just made such a difference. But I love these nachos. What a fun breakfast item.
Absolutely, I agree. The flavor of the raspberry puree is so delicious. And I love, as someone who loves to put things in the freezer and pull them out only when you need it, I'm a big fan of freezer as a pantry. And so this really is an amazing item that doesn't take up fridge space and packs so much flavor.
Great. Well, let's rate this recipe, Sam. So bring up the next poll. Rate this recipe, the raspberry bacon breakfast nachos. Unlikely to use this recipe, might give it a try, a good chance that it'll work for our school. This will definitely be a hit. So we'll take just a moment to rate this recipe. And we're about to close the poll. We've closed the poll. Sam, 43% said we might give it a try. 26% said definitely will be a hit. 23%, almost a fourth, said good chance it'll work for our students. And only 9% said unlikely to use this recipe. Great job, Chef Sam. I love that recipe. Well, we'll be coming back to you, Chef Sam, after our next demonstration. And now I'd like to introduce our third school chef, Chef Rebecca Polson, who comes to us from the Minneapolis Public Schools, where she's culinary supervisor. And she oversees the serving of 60,000 meals a day and oversees the menu planning and the culinary training for 72 sites. She has her culinary arts degree from Johnson & Wales University, and she's previously worked for the Metro Nashville Public Schools and the Spartanburg, South Carolina Public Schools. Hi, Rebecca. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. And I'm so excited to see your recipe, Chef Rebecca. This is one of the most creative school recipes that I've seen. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to turn it over to you so that we can see your dish.
Thank you. So today I am making raspberry chipotle veggie tacos. Something I'm extremely passionate about is bringing more fruits and vegetables to the center of the plate for an entree. So that's what I did with this dish. And kids love tacos. So what better way to tie in raspberries, beans, sweet potatoes, put it on a taco? It's absolutely delicious and even vegan. So right now I have some onions that are sweating in a little bit of oil, and I am going to add garlic. You know, we talked about aroma, and it smells amazing already in here. I think if more schools maybe just sauteed some onions and garlic right before lunch, more students would be eating. So those are really aromatic and adding a lot of flavor. I'm going to add some veggie base so that I'm keeping it vegetarian, and my spices. By putting them in right now on this heat and kind of dry, it's helping them bloom these spices and really bring out the flavor. You know, a lot of us are guilty of having spices 6 months, 2 years old. You know, everyone has that nutmeg from Thanksgiving 2002. time to get a new one, but using this method will really help bring out the flavor if you do not have that option of getting some new spices. So now that's ready, I am going to add black beans, and I'm not going to rinse them. I want this to be like kind of thick. So I'm just going with 3 cans. And I love beans as an option for protein. So this will come together. And then we're going to add that chipotle. This is a pepper, chipotle pepper and adobo sauce. This has a ton of heat to it. So that's where those raspberries come in. They bring that sweetness and balance out the heat. So I'm adding those in. I chopped them. Stir. And my raspberry crumbles. They are whole pieces as well as some broken pieces in there. And this will simmer about an hour and just make your cafeteria smell amazing. So that's really all you have to do for the raspberry chipotle black beans. Let's put a lid on it. Like I said, those would normally simmer for about an hour. Now we're going to assemble them. I have some roasted sweet potatoes that I roasted earlier. This is going to be the base of my taco. So I am putting about 1/4 of a cup of sweet potatoes. That's your red orange vegetable. And I have some black beans that have been simmering for the hour. They smell amazing. You can smell like a little bit of hint of sweetness from those raspberries and some smoke from your chipotle and adobo. So I am using a 2-ounce spoodle. And putting a 1/4 cup on each taco. And then I have a raspberry crema sauce. This is either you could use the crumbles if you have a blender, sour cream, chipotle, and lime juice. And I'm going to drizzle that over the tacos. And that, again, is going to balance that heat as well as give it a really pretty color. I also have some pickled radishes. Pickles are huge, and you don't have to just use cucumbers. So I am going to put a few of those on and some cilantro. I am so glad you guys love basil and cilantro because I've used both. So I'm going to place my tacos in my little to-go container, my boat, so you guys can see. We have your kind of grab and go raspberry chipotle black bean tacos. You've got your 2 grain, 1/2 cup of vegetable, your 2-ounce meat alternate, oranges as well. And another tip and trick I love is adding these raspberries and fresh herbs. I use basil to water, have a water station. And I did this at another district. And not only did participation increase with our students, but our teachers as well. So water consumption went up, as well as it's actually a little decrease in cost too. So raspberry chipotle veggie tacos with some fancy spa water.
Oh, there's comments in the question bar, Rebecca, that it looks so yummy, yum. I wish I could smell it. So absolutely a popular recipe and so easy really to pull together. I love your tip about the spices, about using fresh spices, even though they're shelf stable, but keeping them less than 6 months, 6 to 9 months, or blooming them.
I say you should buy them at the beginning of the school year and Christmas break, kind of if you haven't already gone through them. That way you're at least cycling through them, and they're always fresh.
Yeah, good. We had a question from one of the participants. He's wondering if you could use other canned beans as well.
Absolutely. You could do pintos, chickpeas. I mean, the sky is the limit. And, you know, the great thing about beans is they're mostly, you know, we can get them commodities. So it's a great item to use center of the plate and really bring those costs down.
Great. Well, thank you for the question, Chef Michael, and thank you, Rebecca. I also love how you balance the spiciness of that dish with the sweet tart from the frozen raspberries. Let's rate this recipe. Bring up the next poll. Rate this recipe, raspberry chipotle veggie taco. Unlikely to use this recipe, might give it a try. Good chance that it will work for our school. Definitely be a hit. So we'll take just a moment and answer the poll. Rate this recipe. Unlikely to use it, might give it a try. Good chance that it'll work for our school. Definitely be a hit. And I know that it's hard to think about cooking from scratch for many of us today because we're serving remotely. But I hope that we all get back to the incorporating more school-made foods in our menu when we go back to serving in our cafeterias full time. So rate this recipe. Almost half said might give it a try. 15% said good chance that it'll work for our school. 19% definitely be a hit. And 19% said unlikely to use this recipe. Well, Chef Rebecca, I can tell you that it'll be a hit for our household. I love this recipe. Now let's bring the other chef panelists up, and we will have time for question and answer. So I would love for you, if you have any questions, to either raise your hand. If you want to raise your hand, we will unmute you so you can ask your question. But also, you could type the question in the question bar and we can answer the question. So you have two choices for asking questions: raising your hand and we will unmute you, or typing them into the question bar. Welcome back, Garrett and Samantha. Let's go ahead and I have a couple of questions first. First, I want to know, were there any surprises in using the frozen red raspberry products?
Let's
start with Rebecca.
Okay, yeah, I just love how easy and versatile they are to use. You know, like I said, I used it in a water and a bean recipe. Like, how different are these recipes? And super simple. And I also used it in the sauce to kind of give it some sweet, and there's some heat in there too.
Yeah, great, great. How about you, Garrett? Did you have any surprises?
You know, the surprise that I had is not related to the scones necessarily, which here are the ones that just came out of the oven. I also did
Delicious.
I also did a raspberry pear smoothie using canned pears, and the color is just phenomenal in that product. And it holds very, very well. You get this bright pink that, as Chef Sam said, I mean, it really did make me want to do a Valentine's Day menu, but it's just an amazing pop of color.
Great, great. Sam, I think you're self-muted. Could you check on that? I know I was surprised at really the vibrant flavor of the raspberry puree. I couldn't get around how flavorful that was. Great. I can't hear you yet, Sam.
Oh, there you go. I had to be on my control.
Great.
I love the raspberry product. It is amazing. I think the flavor it packs in such a variety of dishes is really, really versatile to school nutrition. And the fact that the puree comes in a small little container and it's so fresh and full of flavor and it lives in the freezer, so it doesn't occupy a lot of space. I just think it's such a versatile product to have on hand.
Great, absolutely, absolutely. Chef Sam, we have a question from Maureen. She wonders, how long do you cook the waffles to keep them crunchy? And should you spray them, or could you spray them with cooking spray and add cinnamon to keep them crunchy? That's an excellent question.
I think adding cinnamon would be delicious and a great way to, once again, take a base ingredient and add your own flavor to it in its own flavor profile, without buying a whole nother set of cinnamon waffles that might be loaded with a lot more sugar. So I think that's a great idea. These waffles, I always had great luck just cooking them about 5 minutes longer than the package instructions said to get them nice and crispy. But saying that, keep in mind that your ovens are all, their own things that cook at their own rates. So where my ovens might have been 5 minutes, yours might be 2, but really just paying attention to make sure not to overcook them, because you don't want them to be burnt or too brown. You just want them to be nice and crispy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love the tip about making your own cinnamon waffles so that you don't have to have 2 varieties in the freezer. Great. Another question we have from Michael is, what can be made the day ahead of when they're actually being served so that on service day things go smoother? We'll start with you, Garrett.
Sure, that's an excellent question. These scones can be made one day ahead, and they can be kept at room temperature. They can also be frozen and then popped into the oven just to warm before service. So that's a really good question to generate a make ahead tip. The other piece that you could do with the dry ingredients, you could get that all mixed up, measured out and mixed up a day in advance, and then add the wet ingredients in the morning and scoop them out and bake them off.
Great. 2 great tips. Somebody was also asking about a yogurt raspberry glaze for the scone. What do you think about that?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. These could be finished with a little glaze, a little drizzle, yogurt with the raspberry puree, maybe a little, just a hint of powdered sugar to sweeten it up a little bit, and to set it, because just the yogurt glaze, I worry that it would be a little too much moisture. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. And the citrus that I mentioned earlier, you can incorporate like a lemon zest in whatever glaze you decide to put on top.
Great. Thank you, Garrett. And thank you so much, Wendy, for that question. Chef Rebecca, what part of your recipe could be made ahead the day before you serve?
So these beans will only get better the next day. So I say make those the day before, and they're just gonna really develop that flavor over time. You can cut the sweet potatoes and dice them the day before. Just make sure that you do soak them in cold water overnight so that they don't oxidize. And then make sure they're dry when you roast them, because you do want to get a little caramelization on them.
Good. I think the beans would make a great side dish as well.
Absolutely. You don't have to put them on these tacos. They will be great with meat taco or any other kind of Mexican dish that you've got on your menu.
I love that sweet heat flavor. That's wonderful. Samantha, what could we do the day ahead?
The day ahead for this recipe, you can make the yogurt and the vanilla yogurt and raspberry mixture. That would be great to make in bulk and use some for the raspberry bacon nachos and use others to build parfaits with it as well. So you can kind of use that, make in bulk for multiple menu items. In addition, for a recipe like this, it's a great idea to tray everything up the night before so you can keep it on a rolling cart in the freezer. That way, all you have to do is roll it out, pop your waffles in the oven, and roll it out, pop your bacon in the oven. So all of that sort of prepping, doing the traying ahead of time is key with this recipe.
Great. Thank you. A couple general questions. People were asking if this was recorded. Yes, this is being recorded. At some point, we'll have it on the Healthy School recipes.com website. But in the meantime, you can also use the link that you used today to access the recording and share with your staff. Ellen was asking about getting the recipes in a smaller quantity so they could make at home. So I know, Garrett, you have your scone recipe for 9. If you're able to send
even number.
Yeah. If you have a smaller recipe and you could send it to us, then we'll get it sent out to the participants so that they could make this at home. We have a question from Darlene Rogers. Darlene, I think you're unmuted. Are you there, Darlene? I'm going to try and unmute you as well. We have a couple of different muters here. Let me just give me a moment. Okay, there we go. I'm trying to unmute you. You're self-muted, Darlene. Can you unmute yourself to ask your question? Oh, you typed it in. You were asking about the crediting of the puree. The puree credits, a quarter cup of puree credits as a quarter cup of raspberries. It's just a raspberry puree. So it's just the fruit that's pureed, so it credits at volume served. Thank you for that question. We also have a question from Jeanette. Jeanette, can you unmute yourself to ask your question? I'm trying to unmute you. It says you're self-muted. So you could unmute to ask your question, Jeanette, or you could type it into the question bar if you're not able to unmute. So we have another question from Maureen, and this is an excellent question. She's wondering if you have implemented any of these recipes in your schools And if so, what age groups responded best? Now, Rebecca, I know that in your district, you have an amazing 3-week cycle menu for plant-based meals that was really student-driven. So could you talk about that and whether you've implemented this recipe yet?
Yeah, so I worked with our 3 high school green teams on a plant to plate 3-week menu cycle. And it was launching in April, right when COVID happened. So it hasn't really gone out into the cafeteria world, but we're always looking for vegetarian options to put in our meal kits, like we have, Garrett has as well. It's not specifically this recipe on there, but I do have a sweet potato black bean quesadilla, which is great for all grade levels, not just high school. Kids love to eat with their hands, and that quesadilla is, again, another favorite item that kids love that you see on kid menus all the time. So adding those vegetables and bean protein is a great option for all grade levels.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. How about you, Garrett?
Yeah, so similar situation to Chef Rebecca. I was getting ready to put these scones onto our menu for the spring, and then we all went home. And I didn't manage to do a fresh baked product in our daily meal pickup bag. So when the day comes, I know these are going to be a huge hit, and I think all grade levels for this scone, because I mean it's a baked product that I think is pretty universally loved. But I'll probably start it out in elementary because I think it'll be a real treat for those students.
Great. Well, thank you, Garrett. I do appreciate that. And I hate to cut the questions short, but it's time to wrap up. And we have one final poll that we'd like to launch. Don't go anywhere yet, chefs, but we need to launch the last poll. What tips or techniques that we use today are you likely to use in your school? And you can answer multiple tips or techniques. Use citrus zest and juice to punch up the flavor. Adding raspberries to sauces complements the heat kids love. Raspberry puree increases the flexibility of staple ingredients. Increase efficiency. Make extra and use in multiple menu items. So please take a moment to answer the poll. I have to tell you, Garrett, another comment came in from Wendy. She cannot wait to try the scones.
Oh, that's great, Wendy. I think you're going to love it.
Great. We're wrapping up the poll. So the poll is wrapping up. We're going to be closing the poll in just a moment. And actually, more than 50% of you have voted for each of these tips. 56% said you'll using citrus, 51% said adding raspberries to sauces, 56% talk about raspberry puree increasing the flexibility, and 66% said increase efficiency, make extra, and use in multiple products. Great. Now we come to the time with our today's giveaway. Again, it's a frozen pack of 5 different raspberry products, and we have 3 winners for today's giveaway. The first winner is Barbara Harrell from Montgomery County Schools in Maryland. The second winner is Danette Desinsky from Muskogee County Schools in Georgia. And the third winner is Josh Mendeline from Nativity St. Paul in Minnesota. To all three of our winners, we'll be reaching out to you shortly to get your email, to get your mailing address, and to arrange shipment of these products. Now, as we wrap up today, I want to thank, first of all, the chefs that participated, Chef Rebecca, Chef Samantha, and Chef Garret. This was a fabulous webinar, and I loved all of your tips and techniques and the recipes. But I also want a heartfelt thanks to our sponsor, Washington Red Raspberry Commission, who have been so generous with the giveaways, and I'm so excited to share their brand new K-12 Toolkit full of tips, techniques, and recipes. And you can get those resources as well at redraz.org. And one final note, as we wrap up, when the webinar closes, please take a moment to complete the evaluation survey, and don't forget to download your CEU certificate. If you have any questions, email us at info@healthyschoolrecipes.com. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. We were super excited to launch our webinar series, and we'll be putting out more in the future. Thanks again for attending Flavor Burst for School Meals. And thanks to our chefs. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.